Good afternoon, and thank you for coming. I'm Rozell, currently the Dean of the School of Policy, Government, and International Affairs here at George Mason University. We're delighted to host this event with the Aftab Committee, which is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization dedicated to empowering Iranian-American Americans. And the Aftab Committee was formed with the purpose of helping Iranian Americans better understand the rights, privileges, and protections afforded to them by American law, and providing them with the knowledge and tools needed to participate and to thrive here in the United States of America. We have a distinguished panel this afternoon. I take great pleasure having the opportunity to observe and to learn from this panel. Thank you. Shahrooz Shekaraubi is the founder and president of the Aftab Committee. Born in Tehran, Shahrooz was raised from an early age in the metropolitan Washington, D.C. area. His academic and leadership experiences in the United States, Europe, and Iran have led him toward pursuing his doctoral degree in Iranian studies. He has written several articles in English and in Persian on various topics pertaining to the Iranian-American community. He holds a bachelor's degree in Persian studies from the University of Maryland, College Park, and a master's degree in Middle Eastern studies from Lund University in Sweden. Maboud Ansari is a professor of sociology at William Patterson University in Wayne, New Jersey. He is also a Fulbright Fellow, 2015-2016. As a pioneer in the sociology of Iranians in the United States, he is the author of 3 books: Iranian Immigrants in the United States, 1988, The Making of the Iranian Community in America, 1992, Iranian-Americans, A Popular Social History of a New American Ethnic Group, 2013. He has also written over 40 scholarly articles and conference presentations on the Iranian-American community. Currently, he and his colleague are working on writing a book on Gulen-inspired educational initiatives. Leila Piran is Director of Research and Development at the Aftab Committee. She holds a PhD in World Politics from the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C. She also is a Policy Fellow here at the School of Policy, Government, and International Affairs at George Mason University. Prior to this, Leila taught courses on international affairs at George Washington University and served as a research fellow on Turkey at the Rethink. Her research and writing, Leila focuses on Iran and Turkey. In 2013, Palgrave Macmillan Press published her book entitled Institutional Reform in Turkey: The Impact of EU Reforms on Human Rights and Policing. Currently, the mainstream media's attention remains very focused on the recent United States-Iran nuclear deal and U.S.-Iran relations, to the extent that the Iranian-American community's presence and contributions to various aspects of American life are overlooked. In fact, Iranian Americans represent one of the newest and most highly educated minority groups in the United States. Therefore, this discussion panel explores the history, current status, and future of Iranian-American community, whose rising presence in the United States may allow for its influence to grow in coming decades. Thank you, panelists. I look forward to the discussion.
Good afternoon. My name is Shahrooz Shekaraubi, and it's a pleasure to be here at George Mason University. I just would like to thank Dr. Rozell for his opening remarks, and also Barbara Hill for, well, I should say both Dr. Rozell and Barbara Hill for their support in helping us set up this event. I would like to also thank Ms. Fahima Muqtader for her continuous support of the Aftab Committee. I'd like to get to the audience as quickly as possible for their questions. I think it's best if I just cut to the chase so the experts could speak. I do encourage both Leila and Professor Ansari to agree and disagree with each other so that we can make this as informative as possible. So with that said, I'd like to start with Professor Ansari. Professor Ansari, although while it seems that while Iranian integration into American public life is generally unblocked, Iranian-American experiences are often constrained by the ill effects of the hostilities that take place between the U.S. and Iranian government. Um, as you know, the Iranian-American identity takes a variety of forms and directions. Um, however, while sustaining a identity for themselves, Iranian Americans often have to confront several problems in developing a bicultural identity. So, based on your experiences and your knowledge of the Iranian American community, what does it even mean to be Iranian American?
Glad you asked the question and you gave me the kind of context in which I'm able, hopefully, to answer the question. The fact is that identity develops and goes through the process until people internalize it and accept it and then express it and assert it. When we look into the social history of all other immigrant groups in this country, we do see a shift from being immigrant or having immigrant mentality and culture to become ethnic. That shift is also true for the Iranians. Right now, we are in the middle of that shift. There was a time that we were immigrant. Long time ago, I published the first book, and I called them dually marginal people. They were marginal here in the context of American culture, social, as well as feeling marginal if they go back home. But we have come a long way now. We have already built the Iranian community, and in building that community, we are asserting us as Iranian-American. So what is Iranian-American? It's a hyphenated title, is a self-designation, has to do with individual's perception of himself. It has two components. Part is American experience, born or lived or raised here, and carry on American values. The other part has to do with Iran, a very great, significant, remarkable historical consciousness on the part of Iranian. So in a sense, the part of being Iranian is defined in terms of culture, a very, as this audience well knows, a very ancient culture. And the other part has to do with American. Right now, based on the study of this book, Iranian Americans, there are a fair amount of evidences that shows Iranianness, that is, being Iranian, is at the forefront of second generation collective consciousness, meaning those very large group of Iranian, over 50%, whom we call them second generations, not to talk of 1.5 generations that were born and raised in Iran, then they came later on, are identifying themselves as Iranian American. But remember, this is not a fixed thing. It is changing. It, just like any other identity, is a social construction. It goes through the process, but at this point, majority of Iranian, in asserting themselves, they refer to Iranian American.
Very interesting. Now, in this context, the question of whether Iranian Americans follow a linear pattern of assimilation, much like Europeans, or that of a nonlinear pattern of assimilation, similar to that of African Americans or Hispanics, arises. In your more recent research, Professor, you focused on the topic of reverse assimilation by Iranian American youth. What is your understanding of this, and how does this affect the Iranian American community?
Well, here again, I don't have to go to the list and talk of achievements and remarkable success of Iranian community in the last 30 years, despite of antagonistic relationship between two governments. But one way that has to do with my field, that is your experience as an Iranian American, is a kind of adding a new chapter to the book of immigrants in the United States. What does it mean? It means that unlike the second generation of earlier immigrants, Italian, Irish, who came here, who became fully assimilated, but when it came to the third generation, they kind of reclaimed heritage, reclaim parental heritage. In the case of Iranian, we begin to see that this is happening in the second generation. Parents are still immigrant, but kids who are born in these families are, on the one hand, fully assimilated, integrated to society, but at the very same time, becoming conscious and becoming interested to have that kind of identity which reflects the culture. So reverse assimilation is a phenomena that it has happened since 1960s for the immigrant who came from well-to-do family, educated families, and they could afford really to have extra curriculum, extra classes, making trips, and being exposed to so many cultural things. So in a sense, we begin to see that the younger generation, second generation, by going back again, rediscovering or reclaiming the culture, are really going through assimilation, which is hand in hand with maintaining a cultural consciousness.
Thank you very much, Professor. I'd like to now shift the discussion to Leila. As you know, as I know, as many of us here know, many individuals face obstacles in promoting civic engagement in the Iranian-American community. For example, gaining Iranian-Americans to become registered voters, or simply having them become more involved and active in nonprofit Iranian-American organizations that promote such causes. Um, in your opinion, what are the reasons for the lack of trust and engagement, not just between many Iranian Americans, but with participating with the larger American civic society?
I think that's a great question. One of the main concerns in the Iranian American community here still is a lack of trust and lack of civic participation, not just within the community itself, but with the larger American public as well. I really believe that, according to my research, one of the main reasons for the older generation, first generation, is their lack of familiarity, because many of them did not go to high school, or they didn't even from this country. Perhaps they sought a professional degree after they came here, they settled their family, and then they had to go secure a job. So that's why they didn't, first generation did not really become familiarized with these concepts as we know of today, such as civic participation. Um, However, that trend is changing, and I'm happy and delighted to have witnessed a lot more cooperation, a lot more participation amongst the younger generation, the second generations, or the generation five as well. As for the issue of participation amongst Iranians and the larger American public, I really think, again, education is one, and also being culturally aware of what that kind of cooperation between the two groups could possibly bring to both sides. So it's just a matter of finding, I think, the right project, or building consensus on what interests both sides.
So let me ask you this. What is your sense then of why large pockets of the Iranian American community have a negative perception of nonprofit Iranian American organizations based on what you just?
Based on my research, I've found that many Iranians display attitudes of apathy, indifference, sometimes pessimism, sometimes cynicism toward political, participation. Let's say if an Iranian American nonprofit organization, especially nonprofit organizations that are political and they have a political mission, and for instance, the ones that engage in lobbying, advocacy, and they tend to collect campaign contributions as well. However, when the topic of discussion shifts to cultural or linguistic or identity related type of activities, including arts and culture, I've noticed that regardless of whom your audience is, I'm talking again amongst the Iranian Americans, there's a sense of relaxation, and there's a lot more trust. There's more possibility to work together, to sit down, have a discussion, and build a relationship. Hopefully, to build a dialogue on art, on identity, on language, and preservation of Iranian cultural identity in this country.
Your comments bring a question to mind. As some of you may know, recently a young Iranian-American male by the name of Ahmed Aljazeera was murdered by a neo-Nazi in some Irish pub in California, in the parking lot of some Irish pub in California, I should say, I'm sorry. Yet unfortunately, the case was not investigated as a hate crime. Although I should say, since the terrorist attacks of 9/11, other cases of discrimination and hate crimes have taken place against Iranian Americans. However, while other communities are often very vocal about such cases taking place against their community members, Iranian Americans, on the other hand, often ignore these cases when it happens to other Iranian Americans. Sometimes even flat out denying that these issues even exist. Why do you think this is? And I should frame this question for both of you, actually. And what should be the precedent for a relatively new community like the Iranian American community to react and organize against such hate crimes and cases of discrimination?
If I may go back to echo what Leila said, but adding to it that that is a cultural phenomenon, that there is a high degree of cynicism, there is a high degree of mistrust. We brought those with ourselves. When we came, we brought a cultural luggage full of attitudes, experiences, and a high degree of suspiciousness. These are not genetics. These are learned behaviors. That long history of oppression, the whole notion of despotism for 1,000 years, and not looking at politics as something positive, but always as something that you have to pay a high price for it. We learned, therefore. And another thing is that when we came here, we did go through situation which was strained, full of pressure, full of stress. That's why for years we remain uncertain, undecided immigrant, with the kind of eventual returning to home, which didn't take place and is not going to take place because this is home. Roots are there, but this is home. So as a result of that, we really have developed a kind of social psychology that it takes time. But the good news is that this really belongs, this kind of attitude, this way of looking at phenomena, is a kind of old school, unprocessed idea. When I talk to the younger generation, I do not see that degree of very much conditional talk and very much not being clear. So in a sense, I'm so very happy to say that that is behind us. In terms of really why is it that our community doesn't seem to be very assertive, very responsive to violation of civil rights, to cases of Cheyenne that we know of. Well, this again goes back again to the notion that we haven't learned yet to engage in citizen activism. Citizen activism, again, is a very new phenomenon. Actually, it would come out of organizations like this and others that we do so. But we cannot afford to remain indifferent. We are an ethnic. And being an ethnic, you are confronting stereotypes. You are confronting discriminations. You got to have voice. You got to have clubs and organizations that would raise your voice. And this is America. This is the way the American people do. And we as an ethnic, we should go through the same process of struggling for our rights, establishing ourselves, and very much having that kind of attitude that we can make a difference even when we are so critical of what is happening in this country.
Leila, would you like to?
Sure. One of the things that happened in the aftermath of Cheyenne Mazri's unfortunate was that I noticed that a coalition of Iranian-American groups in California and also a coalition of a large group of Iranian-American organizations here in the East Coast as well. They all coalesced together, they built consensus and released a joint statement and reached out to the Prosecutor General in California, objecting his decision not to denounce this crime as hate crime. So I would say that perhaps Iranian Americans today are in a more comfortable position because institutionally and organizational speaking, now we do have groups and institutions are from our own community and understand our problems and issues and are willing to make an effort and to build consensus together to hopefully address these type of issues as this has occurred. And also there is quite a few precedents similar, especially in cases of discrimination against Iranians and Iranian Americans in the United States in the past year or so that have brought many of these groups together. So at least we are having the conversations and we reach out to one another. So there's definitely a platform already in place for addressing these type of crimes.
Great. So let me ask you both this. We all know that the Iranian American community takes pride in being one of the most educated, wealthiest minority communities here in the States. However, some argue that the Iranian American community has a lot to do and learn until they are able to stand par with other successful minority groups here in the States. Specifically, they argue that one of the main challenges facing the Iranian American community are not just the issues of image or the lack of civic engagement that exists within the Iranian American community, but that of a narrative that marginalizes anyone who does not fit into this golden image of success or the model minority stereotype, rather than recognizing and addressing that many Iranian Americans actually have to face additional challenges ranging from socioeconomic to health issues. So what is your sense of this? And why do you think many Iranian Americans focus just on individual success as opposed to both individual and collective success?
This has two parts. The first part has to do with why is it this myth created that we all are the best, we all are super rich, we all know what to do. Everything about us is just perfect as such. We know that there is no basis for it. Again, as you all know, we are so very diverse, remarkably diverse. Diverse not only in terms of ethno-religious group, but also in terms of immigration histories. Each of us came different time from different places. Some of us the first immigrant, first-time immigrants. Some of us are second-time immigrants, just like myself and my wife. Some of us came while they were waiting in Turkey or in Europe on migration, that is waiting to come to this country. These are a variety of histories and have influenced our psyche, our mind, and to some extent our characters. So in a sense, in my book, I devoted a few pages to the notion that let's stop perpetuating this myth that we are the best and we have no problem and we are okay. No, just like any dynamic community, we have problems. We have problems when it comes to parenting, when it comes to aging, when it comes to the fact that we do have poor Iranian in this country, and in every day they are struggling to make it. The fact, there are facts out there. Go and look into how many Iranians are having benefit of SSI, and ask any activists in your community if they do know, if they know Iranian families who have a hard time to make it. So in a sense, I think we should really stop perpetuating that, but that is kind of understanding that why every ethnic group who came to this country has a kind of ethnic boasting. And this is not just monopoly of us. This is self-exaggeration boast. Regarding the notion that why is it we are doing things great as long as we do it as an individual, but if it comes to communal, collectively, we have shortcomings. That again is very much the phenomena that we brought in because somehow we again goes back to the notion that we couldn't depend on others. We weren't quite sure how it's coming up. Uh, uh, but again, uh, in the last 2 years, organizations are established, humanitarian activities are taking place. The very last letter that over 3,000 Iranians did sign the petition for support Iran-American nuclear deal indicates that for the first time, so many CEOs signed a letter. For the first time, so many people that for years I knew they were unlisted. I wasn't able to get to them and ask them questions. Now they are out there and very much indicating that we American, having the Iranian heritage, just fellow American, we are there to do so and so. So I think that is also again changing, but requires learning in terms of being engaged in communal process. My generation did so well here by creating anjumans, centers, where the younger generation knew that parents are going to somewhere to be together and show that sense of solidarity as Iranian.
I really think. Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, thanks. One of the things that I've noticed, according to statistics and evidence that the Public Affairs Alliance of Iranian Americans, PAIA, has compiled over the years, is that Iranian Americans and even recently immigrated Iranians to this country have a tendency to focus on domestic problems in Iran, including but not limited to human rights issues or the sanctions, etc. Which is fine. I mean, I totally understand that kind of connection because many of us have relatives, our immediate families are still back in Iran, our friends are there, and we do understand at a very deep level the implications of the international sanctions imposed on Iran. When I looked at the statistics from 2008 until 2015, I noticed that that focus stayed consistent on these type of issues, but that has been at the detriment of focusing on our own problems within our own community here. Anytime that you're focused, elsewhere, your priorities are, your priorities obviously are different. So I hope that with this current achievement and the fact that the P5+1 powers reached a nuclear deal, the Islamic Republic of Iran, hopefully that the community here in the United States would begin to relax a little bit and be able to focus on its own needs. Because we do have lots of needs, as Professor mentioned, we do have lots of problems, not just with parenting, but also preservation of our own language and identity in this culture, trying to assimilate the new groups and helping them who are coming out. Currently, we don't even have a community center on the East Coast. On the West Coast, there are at least 2 community centers that I know of. So where do we hold these kind of discussions? Outside of universities or outside of media or our circles and parties and family gatherings.
So, with my last question, and I'll open up the floor to the audience for you guys' question. As some of us know, cultural memory and history are important Iranian values. Many Iranian Americans are taught from an early age to take pride in their identity and their history. So, with my last question, I want to ask you both: where do you see the future of the Iranian American community and their broader role in American public life? Do you think perhaps Iranian Americans will become more attached to Iran as they age, or will their attachment and sense of Iranian identity fade as they become more assimilated here in the United States?
Like most of the earlier immigration, we are going to still remain ethnic, but symbolic ethnicity matters. Not being Iranian, but feeling Iranian. This is what I see is coming to our third generation. And of course, there is a major differences between being Iranian, as I am, than my kids, who, of course, my kids are still think that they are Iranian-American, but the third generation is going to feel Iran. So that would happen, but there is a major differences. We are going to remain connected to Iranian issue, Iranian question, as long as we do think that we may have a voice outside of Iran, which really goes by the tradition. I go back to 1960s when I came here to study. U.S. was indeed an outpost of Iranian democratic process. And those of you who have read the history know that we did play a major role in raising the voice of Iranian for democracy. To that extent, I think home remains to us sacred. We are still going to have homesickness, and we are still going to have wishes for the very people that we came from in order to pay back what we gained. But definitely this is going to be home. The only historical experiences that I do see is between what we're going to do and what Japanese American did after World War II. Large number of Japanese American who were born, raised here, did go back to Japan in order to manage corporations, of course, established by American money, by American corporations, but they were managing that. Some remained, some came back. If this tie with the Iran is going to go into a different direction, that the doors are going to be open freely, and people feel very much good to do the trip and good to go and do the investment and exchanges and so on. I think we are still going to play a major role in what is going there. But home is definitely here because our future generations' life is very much tied to American society, American economy.
And then I could open up the floor.
I think it depends. It really depends on each individual and every person's priorities, what they can do, and what are their decisions. I think we are on the brink of something, especially because we are in the aftermath of a nuclear deal, and in probably 6 to 8 months we should see, hopefully, or at least this is what we've heard so far, that there is a possibility for change in Iran. So I think that it's a very difficult question for me to answer, because I really think it depends on each individual, because immigration and migration and assimilation and becoming hyphenated itself is a very subjective process. So whether Iranians or Iranian Americans of future generations, to what extent do they actually feel connected to Iran? To what extent do they feel that they do have a voice in their ancestral homelands as opposed to here? I really think that hyphenated nest and that hyphenated identity will play a huge role in making those decisions, because it would have to really come down to not just emotional type of decisions based on pride or a historical or cultural memory from our parents' generation. I really think it does come to what would benefit and what would serve the benefits of each individual. Because the longer we've stayed in this country, the more we have become more individualistic. And we already do have a history of being very pragmatic, even in our own respective homelands. So I really think that the idea of a pragmatic Iranian, once coupled with the notions of an individualistic, Western-minded or Americanized, identity, have to play out on its own for us to be able to I would hope that there would be sufficient funding and there would be sufficient interest amongst various scholars and experts in various types of fields, including track this process over the long run.
May I? Well, I agree. Let me qualify what I said. I agree with what you said. My council home that I was, us as Iranian, the concept of home is changing. Home was a place that we live in. Now home is a place that we are away from. The term in Persian language is called Boron Marzi, Kharaj Nishin. That is very much applicable here. What I meant was that there is back home right now large number of educated Indian. They are able to enjoy a high middle class, upper middle class lifestyle as educated people, at the same time being at home. Yes, it depends very much on individual. This back again where you came from. But I do see a pattern in case time comes that we think that is okay. It's fun to do so. Times there, to have investment there. I think this kind of going and coming back is going to go on. And in that sense, depends very much how it plays out, the situation in Iran.
Thank you so much. Mona, do you want to? There's a mic behind the podium. I'm sorry. And I'll call on people to ask their questions. So the gentleman from Al Jazeera.
Hi, my name is Ahmed from Al Jazeera. It's a question for both Mr. Ansari and Leila. Could you elaborate more about the debates, the conversations, the discussions, the different viewpoints of the Iranian communities in different areas of the United States and on different levels about the prospects of the U.S.-Iranian relations in light of the latest nuclear deal?
Well, to my surprise, I thought there was going to, Iranian community here is going to be pluralized. I thought that Iranian communities regarding the deal is going to be polarized. One hand against, the other side very much support. But it turned out that overwhelming majority of those who are talking and who are willing to sign up to a petition were very much for the deal, because they had a vested interest, not just as an Iranian, because they knew what has happened in other countries when there is going to be a war. So in a sense, it had nothing to do with their sentiments about the Islamic Republic and the government. It had to do with the notion that they knew that there is going to be a war and they have to, if they can, influence to stop the war. So that turned out, and particularly came out of the people who are not very much politically minded people. I was referring to that petition. That is just one of the petitions, so many of those. So that is my take on that.
I'm not surprised by the fact that there was an actual consensus within Iranian Americans here to support the deal. I really think that Iranian Americans here deeply understood and also commiserated and empathized with many Iranians who have suffered the implications of the sanctions. So I think that they hope to, by agreeing to the deal, by promoting and supporting the deal, and making sure that the U.S. Senate supports President Obama. I really think that the community here was trying to raise its voice to gain a more powerful and robust presence to offer, hopefully, a peaceful solution, a peaceful diplomatic solution to end a humanitarian crisis.
Thank you so much.
Jessica Imami. I'm at George Mason University. Dr. Ansari, could you elaborate on the idea that people are afraid of a war with respect to the agreement?
that what was the alternative? Alternative was war. We were told here. In fact, the public was kind of making it prepare that we are going to engage in another war. So in that sense, they knew that was coming, and we have had the experience of war. We have seen what war means, not just read about wars. All of us have had that experience. That's what I meant. Yeah.
Thank you very much for this great panel. I have a question for you. For someone who have lived here for more than 45 years, it seems like Iranian Americans tend to identify with their homeland depending on the relationship of the two countries. And when Iran and America are not in good terms, we don't want to be identified so much with our homeland. And that happens to many of us who have lived here long enough during the hostage crisis, that we tend to hide our identity as an Iranian. So when Iran is not a taboo, then we don't like to identify. But when the Iran and America are having a good relationship, we much rather be identified with our homeland. So what is the influence of the media of making Iran a dangerous country rather than what it actually is? Thank you.
Well, quite perceptive of you raising that question. Yes, those of us who are here, we have experienced what we did go through hostage crisis. Our kids, that is second generation to a great extent, was damaged because of that. So we became defensive. Hostage crisis make us to be defensive. And in fact, some of us even felt so bad that how this is done as in the name of Iranian, in a sense, violating everything that we knew that was sacred. So, in a sense, Iran never got, because of the lack of relationship between two countries, never Iran got a chance to occupy headlines in a very positive way. So in that sense, you are quite right. If there is a relationship, not only we like to assert ourselves as an Iranian, we in fact have a great sense of pride coming up. But just like any other country, when your country, your homeland, is in kind of the antagonistic relation with your second home, what are your options? Be abstaining, staying away, remain passive, indifferent, but at the same time, you're experiencing so much of tensions, and sometimes even a kind of self-hatred image develops. How can we do that? We are civilized, we have had that past. So these are all notions that often comes up, that you begin to question your own identity, to begin to question your very heritage.
You want to grab the mic just so we could, yeah.
Other reasons that many Iranian Americans who were not necessarily pro the regime were pro this agreement was particularly for this reason, because we knew that if the relationship between Iran and America improves, it would make us as an Iranian American more proud of our homeland, which in the past we were a little bit reluctant to identify ourselves as an Iranian. And you notice that in many Iranians were very successful in here, and they were CEOs of many corporations. They did not ever wanted to be identified as an Iranian. But when this agreement was going to take place, they came out of their shell. Thank you.
Leila, did you want to add something? Or?
I think there has been a tendency within the Iranian American community, very respectfully, to embrace two extremes. The number one extreme is to play the role of a model minority, and I put that in quotation marks. And the other extreme is to keep our head down. Whenever a bombing or a terrorist attack happens, we tend to keep down and to just focus on our own, little life, whatever that's convenient and comfortable for us. Now, I don't think that, that's just specific to Iranian Americans. And as someone who's from the Middle East, I would have to say, I mean, we are looked at by the majority, or I can't say majority, but mainstream, mainstream white American public, as we are Middle Eastern, as we are brown. So I think it really affects, a little part of oneself. at a very personal level, sometimes you cannot really not react or not be defensive about who you are, because you're at peace no matter how much you're at peace with who you are at a personal level. When you're being grouped in the media as a troublemaker or as a terrorist, or you're on a random flight list, or randomly searched in airport after airport on domestic and international flights, you really begin to wonder, where does all this like hostility come from? Is it going back to the Iran hostage crisis, Oklahoma City bombing, the tragedies of September 11th? So I think that's why the amount of pride that Iranian Americans feel tends to fluctuate, because face it, we are human too, and we have good days and bad days.
Anyone else? Professor Aminu Chair, right? Oh, right behind you. Oh, yeah.
Wonderful. And I would like to know, since you mentioned about the negative headlines and the negative media that Iranian Americans are receiving, or Iranians in general are receiving, and as by extension, Iranian Americans are being exposed to it, and the extreme is that Shayan Mazrui incident that you mentioned. So I was wondering if there is anything, and I think that this was also one of your questions, but if we could talk a little bit more about this, that how can we empower the Iranian American community? It's going to be really tough to combat these great media enterprises that are creating these negative images, but how could we empower the Iranian American community, and what can be done in addition to the great efforts that you've been doing?
Well, thank you. I think that's a wonderful question, because it allows for a possibility of thinking about a strategic vision, which means opening up the space, a safe haven for discussion. That regardless of how many disagreements we are going to have together within the Iranian-American community, we can still work toward building a consensus. Because there are lots of issues that are universally shared, like you mentioned, parenting, aging, immigration, getting adjusted and assimilated into this country. And also, there are lots of, hobbies and interesting things and projects that we are all interested in, but we don't know about it ourselves because we are so, busy, working and following, or realizing, the American dream. But at the same time, there's always a void. So we can always stay connected once we decide to have this conversation and continue the conversation and create a safe place for fostering more dialogues and having more opportunities of collaboration. We really need to work on our team building skills together, because I went to school in Iran until I was 14, and they really didn't teach us teamwork. It was all individual based work. You watch out for yourself, you watch out for your family, and then you can think about everyone else. So that kind of mentality sometimes transpires more individualism, more a sense of, loneliness and enemy and marginalization in itself. So we need to figure out that maybe we need to take a step toward ending that kind of marginalization, because once we take that step and we learn to face each other with respect and empathy and tolerating each other's views regardless of our differences, regardless of our respective or genetic differences, because we Iranians, we are very diverse people. Once we reach that safe place and we make that agreement and commitment to ourselves and to each and every individual in the Iranian-American community, I really think we can make a difference for our own community.
Well, just a little bit adding to that, empowering a community requires political force, requires actives. We are just beginning in that process. In my book, I'm referring that to large number of wealthy Iranians who are paying back by creating humanitarian causes, by paying back to universities and so on. And at the same time, if we have approached this wealthy Iranian who are willing, I'm talking about millions and millions of dollars, that why don't you give us, or why don't you make a center? We need to come together to have a cultural center. They probably would not have done that so far. So really, it is very much up to the very wealthy Iranians here who have made it to be responsive to the needs of the community. And I notice in the West Coast that is happening right now. Pars Equality Center is doing exactly that. In Boston, they bought the Iran House and doing that. In San Diego, the same thing. Actually, there are right now more than just my hand fingers that are doing exactly that. But it's just the beginning. But somehow organizations and committees like this have to come to colleges, have to come and meet second and third generation Iranians to kind of expose themselves and give them that sense that it's not enough to be in Persian club. You got to go beyond that. Just like Asian Americans are doing that. Every year they come together as thousands and thousands, spending weekends in order really to talk about how we are going to empower our community.
So I think we have time for 2 more questions. Again.
Here's another question, and first, excuse my ignorance because I'm trying to learn more about the Iranian community in the US. But I feel, and correct me if I'm mistaken, that the views represented here about the American Iranian community in the United States and the identity. What I want to ask is how inclusive and how representative the views said here of the Iranians, of the of the different types and aspects of the Iranian community in the U.S. Liberal American Iranians, as opposed to more religious people or more conservative people. I'm asking this because I've had an experience with the Iranian community back in London, where I've seen, different types of people expressing different views. So what I'm asking again is how representative the identity you have been describing and the community you have been talking about here of all the American Iranians of different opinions and different political backgrounds.
Well, yes, you're right. Despite of regional differences, despite of political differences, despite of religious differences, when it comes to Iranianness, when it comes to Iranian identity, majority of Iranians have a shared values about Iranian history, Iranian culture, and Iran as a country. But of course, just like any other dynamic country, community, we are politically diverse. Political forces in this country have not succeeded in organizing Iranian into any direction of political force. Hopelessly, community has remained divided when it comes to politics. That is my extension. But again, remember, when we are talking of Iranian, again, we are talking about a variety of ethnic religious groups.
I think I understood your question, comparing the Iranian-American community here vis-a-vis the ones in other countries. Is that right? Oh, okay. Right, 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 right. Well, sure. Politically, we're very polarized, as Professor Ansari mentioned. So, yes, and I don't think any possible candidate, Democratic or Republican, unless they really try to understand the dynamics of the Iranian-American community because it's very non-linear and very diverse. And I believe that even our voting patterns, probably more research needs to be done on our voting patterns and how we would vote, that is, if we vote, let's put it this way. So I think that any politicians would have his or her handfuls with us, with our community for a long time to come.
I think Fahima has a question, and then we can wrap it up.
Just want to make one comment regarding why are we a representative of the Iranian American community. The reason of the fracture that we have in our community is the fact that the Iranian Americans are very new immigrant community, and many of us who have been here, including me, after 45 years, originally Iranian Americans always find themselves as a role of opposition. We were opposing the government that Iran had, regardless of what the government was. When the Shah was there as a student activist, we were against the Shah. When the Islamic government came in, we were against the Islamic Republic. So now, for the first time, I think Iranian Americans are finding themselves in a different role, that just like the Irish Americans, that we can play a role between the bridge between Iran and America, now that the relationship is developing, and to make a difference. And we are changing our position from an opposition to someone who can make a difference. And this is why, when it comes to the agreement, I think many of us have the same voice. We're not necessarily agreeing with the Iran government, but we're finding ourselves that we can make a difference for the first time.
It changed. Younger generation no longer thinks of politics the same way that my generation took. That would make a lot of difference.
Well, one more last question, then. Best for last.
Sort of a it was sort of a question, but also a comment. First of all, thanks again for having the panel. Just as an Iranian American personally, I think there is a need for this third space that is often not made available as an immigrant community. A lot of people have churches and religious identities or other, primary identities, but the civic space and the kind of sense of belonging or something that kind of half explains that other part of your personality, existence, shared values is great. So having a forum to discuss it like this helps shape, the direction collectively forward. But as far as civic participation goes, different organizations that you had mentioned had initiatives where they clean a park. And so a series of people get together and they may clean a park. And so that contributes both to the community here, and also is something that everyone can get together, do something positive behind, and and have that space to interact socially, culturally, and everything else. But then at some point, there's a little veering towards how do you identify more just with the Iranian-American part of do-gooding, or then, well, what's the difference between that and doing it in another, and just based on a school, through some PTA or some other organization. So when does this nexus, or when does that little spot turn from the change of identity as you assimilate through activities of this kind?
I'm glad you brought that question. The answer is mainstreaming. We need to become mainstream. This is happening. I was invited for a gala in Miami, Florida, and there Asian Americans and Iranian have come together, initiating project, even having a gala. Same thing is happening in New Jersey when it comes to influencing governor office and going there to present the issues of immigrant. That is happening, but of course, again and again, you need to kind of come out of your box. You are not just Iranian, you are Iranian-American, meaning with your neighbors who's Asian or African-American, you have so much in common.
No, go ahead.
I'm not sure if mainstreaming is the answer, especially for a young Iranian American community that's only been here for 45 years. Fahima Khanum, is that maybe for
I think 36 years.
36 years? Okay, so I think for let's say 30 to 40 years, just to be safe. Um, I think that the efforts, for instance, the kind of efforts and initiatives that some Iranian-American organizations have introduced, let's say, let's go clean the park, or, attract more voters, voter registration drives and et cetera. They're really commendable, but I think the trick, at least from an organizational standpoint, I have to say, is that to always look for what it is that it may interest your members, or what it is that would possibly attract new members and to sustain members. Because to what extent can you ask people to come and clean the park? I mean, it can get a little boring after a while. So I would say, spice it up a little bit. If I were, let's say, to run a new Iranian-American organization, I'm very happy with the Aftab committee, but
I hope so.
I am indeed. But, that would be one way of looking at it, just to sort of get the pulse of the community, ask them questions, go around, do your market research, and, figure out what it is that, the majority of the people, or even on an individual basis, really pull them. Maybe it's because I'm a political scientist. And, Mark can tell you that, doing your research quantitatively and qualitatively, doing your survey research does make a huge difference. I, for one, I used to go and, contribute a lot to volunteer activities with certain nonprofit organizations in DC. And after a while, I thought to myself, okay, I mean, this is really nice, but I'm not really making any connections. I don't feel any more or less Iranian-American. I mean, if I were to dovetail your question with the identity portion.
Well, I think that wraps up our time here. I'd like to thank again Dr. Piran and Professor Ansari and George Mason University for his panel discussion. If you'd like to learn more about Aftab Committee, please visit our website. So thank you.